All right, everybody. Hello and welcome once again to the wonderful Rochester Parkour Gym. We've got a fun one today. We're going to be talking about different hand balancing drills and exercises that you can do at your house to practice and maybe even build up your wrists a little bit. And I don't know, maybe even today you might find your way to your first wonderful handstand. Maybe that's just wishful thinking, but that's okay, because as long as we're putting in the work right now, we are working towards bettering ourselves, doing wonderful stuff, and making the best use of the time. Hand balancing is actually just a random tidbit how I originally got myself started in parkour. I remember being a student in the wonderful spring of 2007 at RIT, and my buddies that I had just met were talking about this cool thing called parkour. They literally just talked about it, and then we had to go off on summer break, and I didn't really get to hang out with them at all because they were in other parts of the country. And that summer, I challenged myself. I said, you know what? I'm going to begin my parkour journey by teaching myself how to handstand. And through a lot of just brute force trial and error, I finally was able to hold a good solid handstand of maybe 5 seconds by the end of the summer. But we're gonna try not to do the strategy that I literally just did. I tried to kick up into a handstand about 200 times a day. That is not the best method to go about training handstands. Today, we're gonna talk about some better strategies that you might be able to employ in your pursuit of getting your first handstand. But while we go about doing that, we're gonna be doing a lot of stuff with our arms, with our hands and our wrists more specifically. So we're gonna warm themselves up real quick. Let's go ahead and put our arms out in front of us. We're gonna get some nice tight fists. And we're just gonna start circling them around as we move on through. When we're thinking about hand balancing, what we are essentially doing is standing, yes, I know, on our hands. Incredible, right? Yeah, handstands, standing on our hands. But really what that means is that we're using our hands, switch direction, we're using our hands as our feet. Your feet are super, super sturdy structures. Our ankles are wonderful, wonderful joints. They've got some really strong, large muscles all around them that work together to help keep ourselves stable. They have a ton of leverage as well because our feet are long, they're not wide. And so we can really put some leverage forward and backward on that. Go ahead and shake that out. We're gonna be moving a lot through our elbow and our shoulder. Let's make a shell for an elbow. We're gonna externally rotate as much as possible. Pull that arm in. We internally rotate as much as possible. We're just gonna go back and forth this way. And so we need to think of our hands not just as hands, but we need to think about how our feet move. And we're gonna talk about that in just a moment after we warm ourselves up. Let's go ahead and switch sides. We're just going through simple rotations and movement patterns to help warm our joints up before we really put a ton of weight on them. Maybe you're just finishing up from a remote work session. Maybe you've been sitting in a chair for a little bit. Go ahead and shake that out. We'll do some arm circles as we normally do. We want to really think about keeping that rib cage nice and still. Externally rotate those arms as they go back behind you. We want to keep ourselves moving nice and good, and we can switch direction. We don't need to go fast. We're not trying to fly away. We're just trying to open up those shoulders a little bit. Very nice. Do one more circle, and you can shake that out. We are also going to be moving a lot with our legs and our lower body in order to get ourselves into various positions. We're gonna be moving through different ranges of motion through our legs. So let's go ahead and do what we normally do. I'm gonna face this way as I do this. I'm gonna be standing on one leg. I don't care if you have a slight bend in that knee, that's perfectly fine. We're gonna take our opposite arm. We're gonna think about reaching down. We tap those toes, maybe if you get there, or you can tap your shin, pause, and then slowly pull yourself back up. We're just gonna do that nice and slow. Again, all we're trying to do is get a nice, soft, dynamic stretch in that hamstring. We're gonna be doing some kicks later. Want that good and warmed up. We don't risk accidentally pulling to our hamstring. Let's go ahead and switch sides. Nice. And we'll do one more. And shake that out. We're gonna continue our warm up with some kicks, just getting a little bit more dynamic. What I want you to think about, you're gonna get a nice little lunge. Make sure you've got some space and room in front of you. We're gonna take that back leg. I don't want you to kick it up as high as you possibly can. Instead, what I want you to do is to slowly lift it as high as you can get it. It steps back, you can even lunge and lean back with it. And then we lift through that leg, ourselves back. Lift through that leg, reach it back. We're just gonna think about doing these nice little lifts. You can have a slight bend in your knee if you so choose. That's perfectly fine. Again, all we're doing is just getting ourselves warmed up, ready to do some kicks in the future. Let's go ahead and switch sides. Lift that leg, step it back. Lift that leg, step it back. Very nice. As always, if you wanna say hi in chat, by all means go for it. We've got Nicole over here, she's monitoring chat. You can say hi, you can share fun stuff.
Hi Audrey, hi Kelsey, missed you.
Hello and welcome. We're gonna go ahead and switch our sides again. This time we're gonna kick that leg just a little bit more than we were doing before. We're gonna lift it with a little bit more momentum as it carries its way up. It might go a little bit higher this time. That's kind of cool. What we want to think about though, again, we're not going for as high as possible. We got nobody here to impress. We're just trying to think about warming up that leg. That standing leg should stay nice and straight. What we're not doing is being like, yeah, leaning back, trying to get that leg up. We don't need that right now. That's okay. We don't want to kick our roommate or our loved one or anything else. Let's go ahead and switch sides. Again, a little bit more momentum as they open up our hips. Awesome. Couple more.
BRB, I'm filling up my water real quick.
Don't say anything in chat, otherwise Nicole's gonna miss it as we shake that out. And then we're gonna be putting some pressure on our wrist. Typically, we don't do a lot of stretches before we do activity. For today, we are gonna do just a couple stretches, and we might even do them midway between some of the drills and exercises that we're gonna do today, just so that we keep our wrists nice and nice. And if at any point in time, you're starting to feel like, ooh, there's a lot of pressure on your wrists, I might need to take a break, by all means, take a break. You can come back, you can watch the rest of the video afterward when it goes live on YouTube or Facebook, and you can follow along when you are prepared and when you're ready. We're gonna find a spot on the floor. We can drop ourselves down onto our knees. We're not looking to like super stretch our wrists. We're just trying to get them ready and accepting of weight as we go on through. If you want, you can put your hands, we're gonna externally rotate them. We can go off to our sides so that we're not putting so much pressure on them. And then we just think about leaning back, and you'll see that my arm and my elbow is still in front of my wrist, so that's not as intense of a stretch. If it's not so bad for you, you've got super mobile wrists, you can kind of sneak them up in front of you if you so choose. We're just spending a little bit of time stretching out all of our grabbies. That's a super technical term right there. All of our grabbies, just getting them ready and prepared to do what we need them to do. And then because we're gonna be in this position a lot today, we also wanna spend some time doing the opposite. We're gonna rotate those hands down underneath us. And the same idea is true. You can start back behind you, so you have this nice obtuse angle from your wrist and your elbow. Or if you've got a little bit more mobility, you can send them out in front of your knees. We like to think about rotating those elbows from out to in, so that our armpits are facing out in front of us. And we just spend some time stretching them this way. We're even gonna think about rotating again, because again, what we're thinking about is just moving our wrists around, putting a little bit of various pressure on them. I'm gonna flip them over just a little bit. Again, we're gonna just keep going through these positions, warming up this joint and getting it prepared to accept the weight that we want to be able to put on them. Your ankles and your lower body are well adapted to holding the entirety of your body weight. Your hands and your wrists, not so much. They take time in order to adapt to that. So today we're going to lay the foundation, and if you have not yet laid a foundation, we might not be able to get through that much, and that's okay. We're doing what we can. Go ahead and shake that out for just a moment. We're gonna do sort of the same exact thing, but we're gonna get ourselves up. We're gonna put a little bit more pressure on our hands and our wrists. What I want you to think about, we're gonna get ourselves prepared for the mindset of hand balancing. And even though we talked about your feet being long, they're not necessarily wide, and even though you can't splay your toes out, we have a lot less range of motion with our toes than we have with our hands. Your hands are wonderful in comparison to your feet, where we can really spread those fingers out. When it comes to stability, we want as much of a base as possible. So a lot of people, when they start thinking about, okay, I'm gonna be putting some pressure on my hands, for whatever reason, some people pull everything inward and they try to make their hand as narrow as possible as they put pressure down on it. What I want you to do is to resist that urge, and instead, I want you to splay your fingers out as wide as you can possibly get them. So I'm gonna find a position here. I'm gonna splay my hands out nice and wide, and I'm gonna be grabbing onto that ground. And all we're gonna do is think about getting ourselves up into a plank position. I want you to think about pressing out through your shoulders. You want to straighten through your elbows. And we're going to do some plank leans real quick. Some of you have done these in strength classes where we kind of tiptoe forward and then tiptoe backward. We get sort of the same concept that we were doing before. We stretch our wrists just a little bit and then we lay on off. We stretch our wrists just a little bit and we lay on off. And we can go ahead and drop our knees on down and we can move our wrists around afterward. We're gonna be doing that one more time, but I wanna talk about one other thing. We are trying to engage all of the musculature from our support structure, which is our shoulder, all the way down into our hands and our fingers, which are actually stabilizing and doing all that fine, minute motor control in order to keep ourselves stable. One of the positions that we can really engage and incorporate once we start to think about holding ourselves on straight arms, we can, as we talked about before when we were stretching this way, we have the ability to anchor with our hand and we can still rotate with our arm. This rotation is engaging different musculature. These are internal, external rotators that go all the way out through that shoulder. What I want you to think about when you're thinking about keeping ourselves stable through our arms, we are always trying to externally rotate. That means we're trying to take that elbow from out, pointing straight out to the side of me, and I'm trying to rotate my elbow to point backward. I'm trying to get my elbow pit to point straight out in front of me. When I'm doing that here, again, my hand is anchored down on the floor. I want you to think about how can I do that in that plank position. We don't want elbows to go out to the sides of us. We want to rotate them in. We want to point those elbow pits out. You might even feel that extra little bit of stability that goes through all the musculature of your elbow into your shoulder as you're thinking about pushing yourself out in this plank position, and maybe even as you start to think about leaning forward and walking yourself back. Leaning forward and walking yourself back. Leaning forward, walking yourself back. Let's do that one more time. Leaning forward, walking yourself back. Very nice. We can shake our hands on out. We can even roll them around a little bit. And let's talk about some stability drills, some stability exercises that we can do. What we're trying to do is figure out a way that we can put most of our center of gravity on our hands and force them to do something that they don't really necessarily like to do. And that's doing that fine motor control of thinking about where your center of gravity is and making the adjustments in order to keep yourself upright and obviously balanced on your hands. Something that we can do from here instead of going up into that super big plank, because when I'm here, what I'm actually doing is spreading out my center of gravity. My center of gravity is not necessarily directly over my hands, it's actually backward. It's somewhere around here, and it'll be different for everybody depending on your body type. That's perfectly fine. Everybody's got different shapes and sizes. But what we want to try to do is figure out how we can get most of our center of gravity onto our hands. And the way that we're going to do that is by pulling our feet inward. And what we're going to think about doing is something that we call a frog stance. Some of you have done this before. What I want you to think about, though, is we're going to be bending through our elbow. We've got this nice little flat shelf that goes along the back of our elbow right through there. We also have some soft stuff on the inside of our knee. And those two structures are going to join themselves together in order to complete what we're calling our frog stand position. We're gonna get our feet maybe just a little bit of hip width apart. We're gonna outwardly rotate them just a smidge so that our knees go off to the side. I'm gonna go up to my toes. Most of you will probably go up to your toes if you're super mobile like Nicole, maybe not, and I don't have that yet, and that's okay. We're gonna think about dropping our hands down out in front of us. And again, when we're thinking about trying to stabilize, we want our fingers out as wide as we can possibly get them. I'm gonna place my elbow underneath that spot that I want it to connect to on my knee. It's just a little bit lower, just a little bit. It's actually more towards my tibia than my femur. Femur up through here, tibia down through here. I'm placing that down just a little bit. And I can even press a little bit outward. I get a nice little stretch when I do that. But I'm getting a nice wide base with my hands. I don't want them too close together. I also don't want them too wide. That can get equally as challenging. We've got diminishing returns there. And what I want you to do is just lightly think about pressing through your toes as you bend through your elbows. You lean forward just a smidge, and then you push yourself back. And all we're trying to do is figure out what it feels like to put a little bit of weight on those hands and those wrists in order to think about what it might feel like to hold ourselves up in a handstand. We don't need to release from the floor. In fact, I don't want you to do that yet, unless you've done it in the past and you're like, I totally know where this is going, Coach Charlie. I'm gonna just go ahead and lift my feet up and do a frog stand. If that's you, great, cool, go for it, by all means. For the rest of you, we're just gonna spend some time pushing forward and leaning back. Pushing forward and leaning back and feeling what it feels like to put some pressure on those wrists, because we probably haven't done that much in the past, and that's okay. This is what we're thinking about doing, building that pressure. And then I also want to use this as the opportunity. Oh, do we have a comment?
I was just going to say, if you're feeling nervous about falling forward, you can do this towards your couch so that you face plant into squishy things.
Totally true. Absolutely. So the next concept that I want you to think about is you have a couple different strategies with your hands and your hand shape. We don't just think about keeping all of our palm flat on the floor if you don't want to. There are other strategies that we can employ here. And if you think about the shape of your foot, and we've got that section on the inside of it called our arch, it's designed that way for a very particular purpose and allowing us to put force through the front foot, the forefoot, through the ball of the foot and the toes, and be able to get some leverage through it that way. Flat feet has its own sort of problem with stability. We can sort of trick our hands into doing that same sort of thing by thinking about pulling ourselves away. Fun little anecdote, when you do this motion of thinking about pressing through your... That was really loud. Somebody had to be very
big motorcycle.
On the motorcycle just now. Yeah. They gotta just be known. What I want you to think about when you're here and you're doing this, fun little tidbit, when you do this, I'm gonna do this on camera just so that you can see. There's a cool little feature of your wrist right here. This is called your palmaris longus, right there. And it just so happens, this is the same sort of muscle that cats have that retract their claws. How weird, right? I know. It only exists like 90% of the human population, and 10% of us no longer have this muscle. It doesn't really do that much, but for whatever reason, when you engage through this way, it pops out right through there. Wow.
Hi, Paul. It's okay that you're late.
How dare you be late, Paul?
You missed hamstring warm up, so we did some L kicks to warm up our hammies, and we did wrist circles and such, and then we're practicing frog stand.
And so what I want you to think about this time, when we engage through, we're trying to think about lifting our knuckle line away from the floor just a smidge as we put pressure through the rest of our fingers. And so we're trying to almost create an artificial arch of our hand, and that allows us to put a little bit more force through our fingers, and we'll explain why that's important in just a moment. But I'm gonna think about pressing through my fingers. I engage and lift through my knuckle line just a smidge, and I'm gonna do that same sort of drill where I think about leaning forward. And maybe this is something where you get yourself here and you're like, oh yeah, this feels way more stable. Maybe you're like, no, this doesn't feel any more stable. In fact, this feels less stable, Charlie. I don't know what you're talking about. And if that's you, that's okay. I've got one other strategy that we can talk about that might work for you. And then if none of them feel stable, you can just kind of pick one and go with it. By all means, absolutely. The next thing that I want you to think about is making a claw. It's kind of hard for me to do this just here. I'm gonna be doing this in just a moment in front of the camera, but we're gonna think about lifting not our first knuckle line, but actually our second knuckle line. And so I'm going to get myself close to the camera. I'm gonna make a wall with my hand, and your opposite hand is gonna think about pressing down and through. And so you'll see how all of my palm goes flat on the floor, but my second digit knuckle line pulls itself away. And what that's ending up doing is allowing me to put a ton more pressure down in and through my fingers in order to keep myself stable. So if I get myself back in camera again, I'm gonna find that shape and that position. Again, you're still thinking about spreading those fingers out, but this time you wanna curl your fingers back just a little bit as you press down through your entire palm, and you're gonna feel what it's like to get yourself up through there. If it feels more stable, awesome. This is actually my preferred method. I feel way more stable when I get myself that way. I even accidentally just like lifted myself out because it's like, oh yeah, this feels great, fantastic. But again, you don't need to if you don't want to. You're just thinking about what it feels like to press down through your hands and apply pressure to your wrists in this way, and what it feels like. I want those of you who have yet to do a lot of work with frog stands, I want you to keep practicing this, and you can keep going through trying the various different positions. If you have any issues, by all means, you can let us know in chat. Otherwise, for those that want to move on, getting a little bit more challenging with this, instead of holding ourselves up on a more stable position, which is on the inside of our knees, we're gonna try to put two hard structures together. We're gonna think about the top of that elbow, and we're gonna think about the position when I make this nice deep bend in my knee. I've got a nice little shelf that goes on top of my knee right through here as my patella moves and gets out of the way. I'm gonna try to connect those two structures together. Now, the hard part about this is that it won't start that way, because in order for us to get there, we have to get ourselves down, and then we need to think about how can we bend our elbows in order to get there. When we bend our elbows, we typically straighten our knees. When you straighten your knees, you remove that shelf. So this takes a little bit of trial and error in order to figure out how to get ourselves there. But what I want you to think about is placing those knees near that shelf on your elbow as you start to think about leaning forward just a little bit. Again, you don't need to go all the way up. We're just feeling out what it's like. Lean forward to get our center of gravity over our hands just a little bit more. And maybe you might even try lifting one leg up and your other one stays down. You start to understand what it feels like to put some pressure one arm at a time. I lift one side up. I've got this nice little tri-point position, keeping my one leg down. Eventually, as we start to feel more and more comfortable, we might consider getting ourselves all the way up. We're thinking about balancing, keeping ourselves there. And as we talked about before, what we don't want to have happen is for us to go tumbling forward, because the next thing that makes contact with something that's in front of us, that thing. That's no fun. We don't need that right now. What we can do instead, I only have hard, rigid stuff in front of me, but this is about the height of a couch. It's actually kind of a little bit higher, but couches squish a little bit. We've got these nice, good, solid pads that are out in front of us. You could also take a pillow and put that down on the ground, as Nicole suggested before. But if we get ourselves here, we make it a little bit more impossible, where as we start to go too far forward, we actually have a solid structure that helps push us back, and it makes it so that we're not totally tumbling ourselves forward.
You can think about your shoulders pressing into the edge of your couch to have that brace without it being like into a wall.
Yes. Nice. Again, you can play around with the different strategies of the hand shapes and the hand positions and feel something that works well for you. You could even just go ahead and embrace that. As suggested, put your head against it, right? And just lift those legs up and feel what it's like to have a different sort of 3-point support, where the top of your head is supported on that object, your hands are supported, and then you think about lifting your feet up. Again, you can play around with that. Handstands are a skill. They take practice. Eventually, from what we're doing here, this is a lot of different newness and a lot of different arm strength in order to hold ourselves up. Eventually, this is not about strength. It just becomes about stabilization and coordination. Handstands eventually become something that don't take a lot of effort, that won't take a considerable amount of strength in order to keep yourself up and stable, just like standing doesn't work ourselves that hard. Speaking about standing, we're gonna talk about something with standing and help derive some learning from it and how we think about holding ourselves up with our hands. So what I want you to do is find a position. If you're just finishing up those drills, go ahead and find any sort of open position. We're gonna place our feet hip width apart, straight forward and back. We're gonna lock out our knees for just a moment, and we're gonna think about leaning forward, just a smidge. If we think about leaning ourselves forward, our entire body leans forward. Pro tip, you won't go that far because unlike Michael Jackson, who used nails and stuff in the stage in order to keep ourselves there, if we lean too far forward, we're gonna go forward. We have no choice but to take that step out and forward. But what I want you to think about is when you lean forward, you feel your toes clench into the ground because your toes understand, hey, I don't want to keep going forward. I need to stabilize my body in some way to make myself nice and still and stable in order to resist that urge to lean forward. You're gonna feel that stuff underneath your foot start to engage. You might feel a little bit of calf because that thing right there is wrapping all the way and connecting to that heel, pulling it to make sure that we're not going forward. We're pressing into that floor, we're squeezing through those calves. We keep our body nice and stable. However, if we get ourselves back up and standing and we accidentally lean too far backward, there isn't much that we can do to stop ourselves from falling backward besides taking a step to get there and reposition. What we want to think about there is that as we're thinking about holding ourselves on our hands, we have more room for error or more room to play with when we take our center of gravity and lean it forward. Just a smidge, not a lot, just a smidge. If we end up leaning backward, we have no strategies left to assist us. We have to take a step backward because we're thinking about how can we employ the strategy when we're on our hands. If you cannot take a step back with your hands, you have no choice but to drop down on your feet. And that's okay. That's part of the learning process. But again, this understanding here, when we are balancing on our hands, we have to lean that way. And I say forward as in the understanding of this direction, forward. Obviously, forward will be a little weird once we start going upside down because you'll think that forward is that way, but it's not that way. Forward is gonna continue that way. If I drop myself down here, and I'm grabbing onto that floor, I'm getting my hand strategy position. I start thinking about that frog position, boom, getting myself here. I am putting pressure forward on my hand, not backward. In this case, your wrist is your heel, your fingers are your toes. We always want to lean towards our toes when we are hand balancing and getting ourselves there. So a couple other things that we can think about. If you have a nice, good wall in your area that you can practice on, great. If you don't, doorways work pretty well. If you want to close that door and practice on there, socks are nice, or bare feet. We don't really like scuffing up our walls that are out around us. These walls, however, have lots of scuffing on them because they're made to run up. We're going to try a couple different things that we can do in our immediate area with vertical walls to help and assist us. Maybe you've done some work in the past. You're like, I want to know what it's like to kick myself up into a handstand. And most people start themselves off kicking up into a handstand by facing the wall this way. What ends up happening is that when you kick up into the wall this way, you want, with everything in your being, two things. You want the security of watching your hands. We like that. We like knowing where the floor is. And we want the security of our feet connecting to the wall. However, typically our hands are going to go somewhere around here. For those that can't see, this is about 1 foot or 1.5 feet away from the corner of that wall, away from the vertical wall that I'm going to be stabilizing myself on. That means that my legs are going to curve way more far forward than we expected in the past in order to get myself connected to that wall. I'm going to do this real quick. I don't know. Can you see this wall, Nicole?
Yep.
You can?
Yep. Cool.
If I do, I'm going to hopefully keep my phone from falling out of my pocket too. If I go dark for a moment, I'll come back quickly as I can. My hands are going down. I'm going to think about kicking myself up. You don't kick yourself up. Again, I'm just doing this demonstrated point where I get myself here. And what ends up happening is I'm putting so much pressure on my back to keep my feet connected to the wall. I'm pushing out through my arms. I'm trying to keep myself stable, and I'm trying to look at my hands. And what happens is what we call a banana back. I have to curve in order for me to get there. And I'm trying to look at my hands, because again, if I'm here and I'm doing this, my arms are not open as much as they can possibly be. I am bending through my back in order to keep myself there. I'm even arching even more to try to keep my feet connected to the wall. This is not a wonderfully comfortable position to be in. It's not very comfortable. Even just standing up on my legs the way I like to is equally not as fun to be in when you're trying to hold yourself on your hands. And that's because we've taken away one of the most important bits of your body. It's this thing right here, our core. You cannot possibly expect force being produced from your lower body to transfer into your upper body without some sort of core tension. This is one of the most interesting areas of the body, because everywhere else we have muscle, and then underneath we have some rigid structure that almost, I get this isn't true everywhere, but it's almost symmetrical around it. I've got all this wonderful musculature that wraps around my humerus. I've got all this wonderful musculature that wraps around my femur. My femur goes right through the middle of it. Again, asterisk, not totally, but for the sake of argument, work with me here. Your spine doesn't go straight through your midsection. That would be very strange. It would be a very odd thing to have all this squished like guts and whatnot on your back. That's where our spine goes. It's like that. If you take Joe Bob, Skeleton Man in your biology class, it has that metal rod that goes through its spine in order to keep itself up. Because if we didn't have this wonderful area of our body and you just put Joe Bob upright, everything in him wants to go this way. And that's no good. So then what is our core actually doing? It's helping to keep ourselves stable. It all wraps in on itself and provides all this wonderful intra-core tension that presses itself back into that spine, and that's what helps keep us stable. It acts as one solid unit, and that's what allows force from here to travel through here and affect this stuff. The opposite is true. If you want stuff or force being produced with your upper body to translate and affect your lower body, you need core tension. How do we get core tension? Once again, those of you that have been here for strength class, you know what's going to happen next. We are going to find a spot on the floor. We're going to drop ourselves down into a seated position. We're going to get our arms out in front of us, and then slowly, we're going to try to walk and slowly drop ourselves into this shape. What is this shape? It's a hollow body. We are trying to press everything in us to get our lumbar spine connected to the floor underneath us. We are engaged through that core. And maybe you're already here, you're going, oh my God, this is terrible. It gets better. You gotta practice. As you get more and more core strength, stands and all stability drills become easier. You can even make this more challenging by opening your arms up over your head. You can even lift your legs up. Yay, fantastic. This is the shape that we want the entire time in a handstand. If we lose that core tension, nothing that we do in our upper body will translate to our lower body, and everything just flops. When we do kick-ups into a wall by facing the wall, we are inevitably probably going to lose our core because we have to lean so far in order to get there. So instead, we're going to be smart about this, and we're going to do something different. We're going to turn away from the wall. Oh, away from the wall. And we're going to drop ourselves down in a plank so that our feet are connected close to the wall, and our hands are out and away, and we're thinking about pushing out through our shoulders. And what I want you to think about here, without doing anything else, we're holding ourselves up. I want you to think about putting one foot up on the wall, and maybe you slowly push in with it. And as you do that, you have no choice but to change the shape of your shoulders by opening them. Just a smidge, just a little bit. I'm gonna try to do it this way. I don't know if the camera is zoomed in enough that you can really see. I'm going to try to do this while keeping my opposite leg in view. Again, I'm thinking about getting myself in that plank. I'm leaning forward and pushing out through those arms and that shoulder. I place that leg up on that wall just a smidge, thinking about pressing. As I press, I think about engaging through my core. I'm holding myself steady. And that in and of itself is really hard. It's really challenging. And that's okay, because we're thinking about where's our center of gravity. It's not over our hands. Near the wall. And that tension between our hands and our legs is what's keeping ourselves there. If you got yourself there and you were already starting to feel shaky, great, keep that up. Keep practicing. You can keep that other leg there ready to drop on down and lower yourself down safely into a knee support if you want. If you felt relatively stable, we can start the process of walking ourselves up into a handstand position.
But before we get there, show us how we would use our couch, like the box by you, to make this a little bit more comfortable.
So, a couple things. If we don't want to put pressure on our wonderful drywall, or we don't want to scuff it up, or we don't want to put pressure on our doorway or anything else, we can do roughly the same thing with that object. It could be a chair, it could be a couch, it doesn't necessarily matter. What we're gonna think about doing is getting ourselves again.
Just something that's up against a wall so it will not slide when you push against it.
Correct. And we're gonna think about taking our toes, we put them on that couch cushion, but we're thinking about pushing up through our hips, because what we want to have happen there is for this to not go into its banana back position. We are engaging and trying to push that lower back out away from us as our hips lift up and away, as our arms open up, as we open up through our shoulders. I'm gonna do that this way just so that you all can see. Again, I'm gonna start that plank. I'm gonna take my toes and place them up on top of that object. And I haven't moved my hands. I'm just thinking about engaging and lifting and getting my hips up over my shoulders just a smidge. I'm thinking about pushing it out through my shoulders the entire time. I'm grabbing onto that floor, holding myself nice and steady. I'm thinking about rotating through those elbows in order to keep myself nice and steady. As we get better and better, if we're using a wall, we can start to walk those feet up that wall as far as we feel comfortable. What we don't want to have happen is for us to get there and go, and then have no choice but to drop down to the side or to roll ourselves forward or anything else. We want to be able to go up and down this same exact way. If I'm getting myself here, I'm gonna try to do this without rustling the microphone. I apologize if it rustles. I get myself here. I start by getting that foot up. I push into it, and I get there. And as I think about walking, what I want you to really think about doing is not pulling your hand away from the floor. Because if we pull a support away, if I'm holding myself, I've got my center of gravity in between both of my feet, and I pull my leg away, I'm gonna fall that direction. Instead, what we do when we think about holding ourselves up, we take that center of gravity and we think about pressing through that other support. When we're here, we're not pulling an arm away. We're thinking about leaning and pushing, leaning and pushing, leaning and pushing. And if I do it this way, you can sort of see the different action that's going here, where one arm is pushing out a little bit more and the other one moves and allows for me just that extra little bit of room to maneuver my arms. That's what we're doing when we're pressing ourselves up, walking through that position. I get my legs up, and I think about walking. Nice, small, nice and small. And I might stop at some point and go, I feel a little worried about this. I'm holding, I'm breathing, doing nice and good. And I start walking again. Walk my feet, walk my feet, walk my feet, and I get myself back down into that position. The slower you go down, the more strength you're building, the more you're helping yourself understand how to keep that core tension nice and still as you walk your hands out and away. You get done with that, you start going, oh, hands, okay. Maybe I want to stretch them out a little bit. I like to do either this on the ground, or you can just take your hand, put them in the opposite position, stretch them out just a smidge. Again, you don't need to use a wall for this. You can absolutely do the same thing with your couch. Once again, I'm going to do this way. I'm going to find that position. To start that plank. I get my feet up. And from here, my feet stay still, but I think about walking, walking, walking. I might get to a point where I go, oh, can't go any farther. I'm gonna hold, and I'm gonna breathe, nice and good. Then I walk, 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 drop my legs. And those are wonderful drills that help get you in the mindset of what it might feel like eventually to hold yourself in a handstand. Because in the beginning, a handstand will not feel comfortable. It probably won't feel easy. You are working in order to keep yourself up there. Eventually, we can take these strategies, we can start to learn how we can keep ourselves so nice and still and stable that we're not really doing that much work in order to keep ourselves upright. For now, we're gonna be working a little bit, and that's okay. What will never go away though, no matter how good you are at handstands, is this area of your body. Those forearms and those hands, they are never going to get a true break. They are always activated, holding yourself stable, because all of your stability goes through that wrist. They go through all the musculature of that forearm. That's how we keep ourselves upright. Cool? Cool. If we had some success with that, we might be able to move on. If you're like, that's really hard, you can keep practicing that. You can just gain the knowledge that we're about to go through as you know, and you can come back to it as you feel more comfortable with it. If you were able to get yourself up to the wall, by all means, it's a wonderful strength drill as well as a nice, good challenge to try to get your sternum connected to the wall. That's challenging. But the most important thing that's happening when you get that sternum connected to the wall is that you have no choice but to completely open up through those shoulders. That's something that most people leave out. They try to do their handstands by keeping their arms out in front of them. And this can never work without doing that thing that I talked about, banana backing. This is the shape that most people try to keep themselves in a handstand, and it won't work. Or if it does work, you are working so much harder than you need to be. We want to think about not banana backing, we're gonna think about pulling through here and opening through our arms in order to keep ourselves as straight and still as possible. That can only happen here. If you're trying to put that sternum against the wall, that's the only way it's going to happen, by keeping yourself nice and still and curling and getting that hollow body shape that we were talking about before. Again, if you felt good going up into that, we can do something a little bit different. We can actually keep our hands away from the wall, and we can start to think about what it might be like to create that line with one of our legs, but keep another leg as a support. I'm gonna do this on the couch first, then I'm gonna be doing it on the wall second. Once again, I'm gonna start myself off in that plank. I'm gonna get my feet set up on top of that cushion or whatever it happens to be. I'm gonna walk just a little bit, not as much as before. I'm gonna think about how long one of my legs might be. And then from here, I'm gonna think about holding, I'm gonna use my right leg on the floor, and I'm gonna think about lifting with that opposite leg. I might even point through my toes. For right now, all I want you to think about is what it might be like to keep yourself open up in this shape, in this position. And I'm working right now, it's pretty hard. I can even drop, you go to the other side, lift. Maybe you can hear me breathing really hard right now. I'm gonna drop, and I'm gonna walk. Whoa. That was already pretty challenging. I can hear my own heartbeat. For me, because this is so low, it does two things for me. I'm probably not able to get my body completely straight up, my center of gravity completely over my hands, because I'm limited things, these hamstrings. I can never do enough hamstring mobility to really improve. But that's a wonderful drill for me, because what that's helping me do is think about engaging and holding as I think about building that line through that opposite leg to get myself upright. I'm trying not to bend that knee, that support knee, as much as I can. I really wanted to use that as that wonderful mobility drill that it is. I can do that same thing against a wall. Once again, I'm gonna find a spot, get myself in that plank. I'm gonna walk those feet. Slowly walk your hands, but not as much as before. And then we're gonna drop one leg. We're gonna open the other one. We're gonna think about pushing that toe just a smidge. I'm thinking about opening. What I don't wanna have do is for that leg to go straight behind me. I'll do that this way, just so you can see. Maybe. I don't know if this is the right angle for this. Do my best.
We don't want that leg to travel back behind us because now, what do you see on my back? You see banana back? This is no good. I need to think about engaging, squeezing, holding, opening, pushing out through my arms. We can drop ourselves down and arms out. Ooh.
And so that straight leg that is pushing away from the wall, so the one that's interacting with the wall, is going to either go straight or not, dependent on how close your hands are to the wall to begin with, since your leg is a finite length.
Absolutely.
So you can measure, if you happen to have that amazing L hamstring mobility, you can measure by sitting down on the ground. Charlie's going to show. And you can understand, okay, that's where my hands need to go. And you can turn yourself around and you can get that hand position set. So then ideally, he's able to crawl himself up. And then as he presses through, his hamstring mobility is limited, not quite to that 90. And that's okay. Good job.
I'm working on it. It's slowly getting better. We can shake our legs out. We can shake our arms out. I got a couple other things that I want to talk about in our progress in building that foundation and getting that first wonderful handstand. We talked about frog stands. We talked about wall handstands and walking our way up. We talked about how we can use a couch. Eventually, a handstand's not going to be something that we can just kind of gradually walk ourselves in. Most people will get or achieve their first handstand by kicking into a handstand. A couple of things we got to think about though before we actually think about kicking ourselves into a handstand. When we kick, most people are generating so much momentum that they are sending themselves surging forward. That's not what I want you to think about. The second thing is, because when we think about doing that kick, this is very similar to kicking up into a wall by facing it. Most people don't want to open their shoulders. They want to keep themselves facing their hands and the floor, and they inevitably kick themselves up into a handstand. We're going to talk about what we can do practicing some other drills that we've done in the past in any of our mobility classes or strength classes that you can think about right now and how you can change them to help assist you in your progression up to a handstand. We're going to start ourselves off with an L kick. In order to get ourselves into an L kick, we need to find some spot on the floor. We need to make sure we're not going to kick anybody or anything that is behind us. We also want to make sure we've got some space to the sides. We're not going to be kicking enough that we're going up into a handstand, but it's nice to just look around. Make sure you've got a lot of clear space whenever you're practicing handstands. We're going to find a good solid spot on the floor. And again, we're thinking about holding that ground. Find that strategy that you were using before with those hands, get themselves ready. Then we're going to think about kicking one leg as we press with the other. And all I want you to do for right now is just do a couple of these, get yourself back in oriented, thinking about that nice good L kick. We're trying to make an L shape. You don't need to go super high. You only need to go that high. It's just that nice little heel drive, a little lift off the floor. But we're trying to keep that downward leg pointed at the floor for as long as possible. Let's go ahead and switch sides. Maybe one side happens to work better than the other. And we don't need to go super high here. We're just thinking about getting yourselves back in the game. Lifting on up.
And no banana back.
No banana back. So, what I want you to think about as we start getting ourselves through, again, maybe one leg just works better for you. If it's your better side, for me, I find that I have way more room for success when I take off my left foot and drive with my right heel. Maybe you're the opposite. Maybe you would rather jump off your right and drive your left heel. Whichever one works best for you, by all means, stick with it from now. If you want to just keep switching sides, power to you, that's wonderful. But what I want you to think about, we are not driving that heel and swinging it that way. Instead, I want you to think about lifting it up the wall. That's all we're doing. We're just thinking about lifting it that way, not that way, that way. That's where we're trying to go. And as we start to feel more and more comfortable and confident with this, thinking about pressing through that leg up away from us towards that ceiling That's where we start to understand, oh, I can't banana back. I need to engage that core as we get better and better and better. So I'm gonna take off my left leg, have a little bit more success with it. I'm gonna drop that leg on down. I'm gonna get that right heel ready to drive. But what I wanna think about now is just that new perspective. I'm not kicking over my head. I'm trying to lift it up. As I get better and better with that, I might even help myself out with my shoulders. Thinking about pushing out through my shoulders little bit by little bit. And again, you don't need to kick up into a handstand right now. All you're thinking about doing is what does it feel like to press through that heel? Think about lifting it up. What does it feel like to squeeze my stomach as I go airborne? What does it feel like to open my shoulders? Don't kick and close your shoulders. Kick and open your shoulders. You could even play around with your head position, and you can think about watching your heel. Once again, I'm gonna try not to rustle the microphone too much. You just monitor the microphone and tell me what happens when I do this. I want you to try to watch your heel of whatever leg you're trying to kick. What ends up happening is you have no choice but to open those shoulders a little bit because your head's trying to follow through. And I was able to see my toes the entire time. If you cannot see your toes, you are either not driving with your head or you're kicking and removing that straight line position as that leg goes back behind you. That's no good. You want to be able to see those toes the entire time as we get ourselves here. I'm going to switch sides because I can use some practice on this other side. Think about lifting, driving. And again, you don't need to go super high with this. You don't even need to kick up into a handstand with this. All we're trying to do is to play around with the idea and the concept that at one point in time, we might kick just that extra little bit or lift just that extra little bit, that we start to spend more time on those hands. You can even try to play around with this and say, even though I'm kicking up, I'm gonna try to resist gravity to the best of my ability. I'm gonna try to slow my descent back down to the ground, where I get myself set and I think about lifting and I go, no, and I don't want to let my body go back down to the floor. I'm trying to hold and resist the entire time. That goes a long way at helping us understand what it's gonna be like eventually to kick up into that handstand. The last bit that I want you to think about is that other one of as we start getting ourselves up more and more and more onto our hands, in order for us to keep that handstand position for the first time, we need to get ourselves not centered over our wrist. We need to get ourselves centered over the middle of our hand. And for most of us, that's gonna be somewhere around these two knuckles right here. As we get better and better and better, we have to think about leaning forward a little bit. And that's kind of where the rub is. We need to practice and figure out what it feels like to get there. How can you practice to feel like what it's like to get there? These wall handstands that we did before. So important in your journey to your first handstand. Same thing with the couch. Learning how to hold yourself up. Get your butt up nice and high. Hold yourself on those hands and maybe lean forward just a little bit. Starts to go a long way in your journey to that first handstand, until eventually, when you're starting to practice these L kicks, you start getting yourself up just a little bit higher and you're like, whoa, hey, I'm starting to hold myself just a little bit extra. And you might even say, I'm gonna try to resist just a little bit harder than I have before. We start to think about, oh, I was up for just a little bit longer. Oh, I'm up just for a little bit longer. And we always think about going back down towards our feet. Inevitably, at some point, I don't want you to do this right now, but just so that you have the awareness, we're not talking about it today. As we start to really contemplate trying to kick up into our handstand, we have to think about strategies of bailing out if we accidentally kick ourselves too far. Our goal is to never truly have to bail out with like surprise or panic or anything else like that. What we're thinking about doing is just stepping ourselves off. If I accidentally kick too far, the most usable strategy is just a little talk out. We get ourselves up, we kind of cartwheel ourselves away. Or if I kick myself up too much and I go, oh no, and I have to take that extra little step, to get myself out of the way. That's where we need to think about our surroundings and making sure that we're not going to kick anything on our way down. What you want to have happen is to always think about keeping yourself under control. We think about lifting through that leg. We always want to get ourselves back down onto our feet as best as we possibly can. I need a tissue. Oh. If you have any questions on other things, if you want me to go over any of the other drills that we did in the past, by all means, you can say so now. I'm gonna do a couple different things here, give you a little bit of time to write your reply, and hopefully I can get to them as best as possible. Otherwise, feel free to play around with any of these shapes, get yourself into a different position, and just spend some time practicing holding yourself up on your hands.
Audrey says the last part's been really helpful, and thank you. Loved the detailed breakdown.
Fantastic. I think a lot of people just think that handstands are something that just happen, and that eventually if they kick up to the right amount, just keep themselves there. Peace.
Hey Charlie, what happens when you bend your leg on your L kick?
Sadness. Not true sadness. So I believe what you're talking about is bending your drive leg. Whatever heel you're driving. For me, if I'm taking off my left leg, I'm heel driving with my right. If I bend through that knee, I think that's what you're talking about. What you need to think about is this part of my body has weight. Every part of my body has some sort of weight. So when it comes into the mindset of I'm trying to balance on a part of my body that I'm not used to balancing on, what happens when suddenly one part of my body adds weight that way? And stuff gets challenging. If you let a rapid drop in your knee bend, sometimes you're going to feel a huge surge of forward momentum and you'll have no choice but to cartwheel yourself out of your handstand, or if you accidentally do that too surprisingly, you might have to employ a little roll, which we'd never really like to have happen if we can avoid it from happening. However, sometimes when you think about the taller you are or the further your center of gravity is from what you're balancing on, you have a harder time balancing. How can we improve or de-challenge isn't a word. Make easier the challenge of balancing.
Scaffold.
Sure, to scaffold the challenge of our balance. Instead of balancing up this way, you can bend your knees. Or for those of you that were practicing forward bounce, you may have figured out that when you go really low, the forward bounce position is significantly easier. And you're like, why? Because your center of gravity is so much closer to what you're balancing on. When you're up on your hands, again, a body part that we're not used to balancing on, and we're straightening through our leg, you are as tall as you can possibly be, and you are lifting that center of gravity farther and farther away from your hands. If you purposefully and strategically, asterisk, that's important, if you strategically bend through your knee and you're prepared for that, what you are actually doing is lowering your center of gravity to your stabilizing part of your body. That's your wrists, and you make their job slightly easier. Having a true straight body handstand will always be more challenging than a straddle handstand or a bent knee handstand. I'm gonna do that just so that people understand what we're talking about. Drop in here. Just that extra little bit can change where my center of gravity is, and it starts to make itself a lot easier for me to balance there. I can even start to really kind of play around with both my legs as separate units and doing what we normally do when we're doing lateral bounce. These little shifts in my arms help keep myself stable, and I don't need to change the shape of my ankle or move that a lot in order to keep myself up. That's sort of what's happening when your legs are bent out that way. However, what we want to do is to figure out how can we keep ourselves stable just through our hands. That's the hardest bit. Most people get themselves up into a handstand and they start doing this. Wow, I was up there for so long. It's like, but you weren't very stable. Did you actually hold a handstand, or were you just up there? And it's very similar to the experience of getting on a bar and going, wow, wow, I was up there for so long. But did you have control the entire time? No, then maybe not. That's what we want to think about. Good question. Thank you so much. Not good on this side.
So now we're gonna just go through a review. We did the frog stand, now we're kicking up into our L kick, trying to balance, ready for a talk out if we need it. Just reviewing those drills.
Or we can go to the wall walks.
And that full progression would be sternum touches, no banana back, pressing through those shoulders. And this can also be done on a couch or something that's against a wall that won't slide out from you when you push your feet on it. How's everybody's shoulders?
Oh man.
Ooh, we never did the hover away. L hover from the wall.
Do I have to?
Yeah.
Oh, handstands are hard, y'all. Whoa.
And just lifting through with that full mobility, trying to reach that heel out and away. He's doing awesome. Good job, Charles.
Oh man.
Okay, last one on the wall. You got it. You got it. Hover that leg. Hover that toe. So that bottom brace leg gets off that wall. So as he's reaching that heel and thinking about sending it behind him without banana backing, that toe gets to hover and then regain composure, hitting the wall when you get uncomfortable. Making sure, again, keeping that hollow body and not bending your back.
Oh man. That was good. It's been a while since I've done just like one session and balancing, so this is actually pretty good. It's pretty tiring. Whew. Thank you, everybody.
Y'all are great. Good job, Charles.
Enjoy. I don't believe we've discussed yet what we're doing on Thursday.
I know for sure on Sunday we're going to do True Balance with the bar trainers, because by then we'll have them delivered to the pre-order humans, ideally. But the next live stream is going to be Thursday at 5:30. So we'll see you then for some more shenanigans.
Thanks so much, everybody. See you next time.